This is Ask an Expat with Marcus and Matt from An Expat's Russia, where we answer your questions about what it's like to live, work, and travel in Russia.
Hi everyone, welcome to this episode. Today we're going to talk about the pros and cons teaching English in Russia. For me, the number one pro by far is definitely adventure. It was always an adventure in Russia, just living there. Teaching English also could be an adventure as well, but Marcus, what do you think about adventure as a pro, teaching English in Russia?
My first experience in Russia, it was not teaching, it was as a student, but I would say overall the adventure of not just the very different mentality, very different climate and environment, the very different language. Like every day you saw something new, not necessarily good or bad, but looking back you have funny stories, and especially when you're learning Russian, you maybe say something wrong it comes out wrong, and so the adventure of learning a new language coupled with a completely different environment, it really is a fast learning environment, and it opens your mind. That's probably the adventure how I would describe it.
And I would say at the same time that it's just everything you do, it seems like a big accomplishment. Obviously there's some downs as well, but like the ups, like when you finally, I remember in the very beginning, I was just living in Russia, teaching English, and the internet went out at my house. I had to call the internet company. I could hardly really speak Russian, but I was able to understand and get the internet fixed, and I was so proud of myself. It was like, I don't know, the biggest accomplishment of my life at the time. It felt that way. So there's always just all these little things that contribute to the adventure aspect of living in Russia.
The funny thing is that the adventure comes as an American, you might go to Europe and you could probably get by with English, right? But once you land in Russia, it's you are cut off. It seems like you're cut off, right? So you have to figure out how to either speak Russian or find somebody who speaks English or good enough English. You'll know the shopkeepers or in your area who kind of speak English or are nice to you, and so you'll go to that flower shop or that whatever shop it is or store. So that's a much different thing than going to Europe or another maybe Latin America. Again, they might not speak English, but you could potentially get by. Right.
But anyway,
the number two was the number two pro for teaching English in Russia is the demand for teachers is very, very high. And this is across the board. Language schools, private schools, international schools, kindergartens, even some Russian state schools, although rare, but you can find groups. Usually, parents will be the initiators of those groups.
Well, no, I think,
but also,
come on. I think any Russian state school would love to have a native speaker as a teacher. I think the problem is just budget. It's not that they're not looking for native speakers. It's nobody's willing to work for 25,000 rubles a month like Russian teachers, and especially outside of Moscow.
Right, so that would be more of a adventure type position and learning.
Right.
Because if you were just starting with English teaching, then you could approach a state school and maybe not even get paid, but on a volunteer basis or something. It would, the options are there, but it would be a good learning experience, but it wouldn't be something that would pay very well. So, but the other kind of the biggest money maker would be private teaching. And so across the board at schools, but also private teaching, you have a huge demand. And Moscow, St. Petersburg, I'm not quite sure about other cities across Russia, but I know there is demand, but the pay would definitely be much lower in different cities.
Here's how I see the situation. I think any any Russian with any wherewithal about thinking about their future wants to learn English. Of course, I would call them even a minority that wants nothing to do with English. Even the ones who don't speak any English know that they should speak English or should be trying to learn. So I think, in a country of 140 million people, there's at least 100 million people who want to learn English, or their parents want them to learn. So there's never
Right.
going to be enough teachers. I mean, you could say the same thing about China, and that goes along to our next point, which was salaries for teaching English in Russia are quite lucrative, especially when taking into account the cost of living. There are two different ways to make good money in Russia. The first one is either teaching some specialized form of English. You could do that through a school or universities. You can make pretty decent money. But if you really want to make good money, that's going to be teaching privately. So a lot of people get their start by coming to Russia. They make kind of a measly salary teaching at a language school for 6 months. At the same time, they're teaching, in their free time to people that they meet along the way. Going back to your point about different cities in Russia and what kind of demand there would be for learning English, I think it depends. I think the demand is definitely there in any Russian city, right? The problem is, how do you actually find the people who are willing to pay? And I think the infrastructure is just not there yet in a lot of the other big cities to be able to find, there's not agencies that work with wealthy people, that put wealthy people in touch with English teachers and actively look for English teachers, right? So without that, it's hard to get in touch with the right people. So I think salaries, as long as you're willing to teach, some freelance, you can make very good money, especially when you consider the cost of living in Russia is quite low.
Right. As far as the cons, so this I would say this is a pro and a con. Number one, con, flexibility, meaning when you're doing lessons with private lessons with families or children, or potentially executives, one-on-one lessons basically, you can really dictate your schedule and say, hey, I'm only open these days, these times, especially when you kind of have some teaching under your belt.
Right.
But it goes the opposite way as well, where they can, your students can dictate, hey, I'm only available these times. And if you're leaning towards more private lessons, then your salary can sometimes fluctuate because people get sick, people cancel, people go on vacation, you take vacation. So yes, you can set your own schedule per se, but also you're susceptible to cancellations, and you only make money when you're having the lessons.
Right. Well, I think the flexibility, it changes the more you get used to it, right? So when you first arrive in Russia, you don't know how everything works. You've done some research. You start working at an English school. They give you lessons, or they're hiring you out to go work at companies or for specific clients. They're not going to ask you. And there are two different ways. You can go and you can start working directly for a school, or you can show up and kind of be a freelancer, which is kind of what I did. I worked freelance for a number of different schools. And essentially, when you don't have any work, you're going to take what you can get. And then you find out, as you go, your schedule is sort of building itself out, not in a way that's conducive to where you live. And it results in a lot of wasted time. But as you progress and as you meet more people and, start, building your base of students that are just between you and them, the relationship without a language school in the middle, then you can really sort of take that flexibility from a con in the beginning, and it is very much a con in the beginning, into a positive, as you said. But the next con that I just want to touch on is cultural differences. There's lots of cultural differences when you go to any country, and they probably also impact teaching English, but we just want to kind of bring up a few here. I know, Marcus, you were telling me, working with demanding wealthy Russians is not always easy. I fortunately never had that experience, but I know a lot of other people have had that experience. What would you say is the hardest part about it?
Well, there's this one issue is that Um, so let's say you're working for, you have one-on-one lessons with whoever it is, an adult or a child, um, and you're going through some kind of language school. And this, you mentioned this in another video. If they're paying 6,000 rubles per hour and you're actually getting 3,000 rubles, you are thinking, man, is this really worth it for 3,000 rubles per
Right.
hour? And
That's
the client is thinking, wow, this guy, I'm paying 6,000 rubles. He should be doing
You
this
should
and
be
this and
bending over
this.
backwards.
And so the expectations are way off,
Yeah,
right?
that's a great point. And you
So
say 6,000 and 3,000, but I will tell you from my personal experience, I was working somewhere, the person was paying 7,000 and I was taking 2. Like this giant chunk of money in between. And you're right. It certainly sets completely different expectations
so
for both parties.
So when we talk about demanding, that's number one usually where the demanding client comes from. But overall, to get a private tutor, for example, for your kid, it isn't cheap because um, you don't want to go across town for 1,000 rubles, right? So you're going to have to charge you know a good amount of time, a good amount just to get to the person's location. So again, the client isn't looking at how long it takes you to get there. They're just looking at the time that you spend at their house or office or whatever. So again, they're saying, I pay you 5,000 rubles for an hour, but in your mind, you're thinking, well, it takes me 45 minutes to get there, 45 minutes to get
Right.
home. And so again, the expectations are high from the client side due to those factors.
Right.
Um,
Well, I think one of the other cultural differences that I experienced, and I'd be interested to hear your experience. We never talked about this, but Russian students have a different sort of attitude towards teachers than I think we do in Western countries, in Western Europe and the United States specifically.
Much different.
Much different. So, like, I found that a lot of students, they just want some boring, plain explanation, and that's what all they always got. Or they really want some, like energetic explanation, but they don't actually know what to do with that because they've never had that. It turns into just kind of like a game. And I've sometimes found it difficult to find a balance when you're teaching, and definitely parents have very different expectations about what a teacher should be doing with students than, say, an American parent.
Yes.
And so just these small cultural differences, they seem insignificant, but they really do impact the way that you teach and people perceive your teaching.
I would say that parents typically want, so Russian kids or younger students are typically. It's funny, you have this. I've had this shown to me several times by students. They'll do this like motion with their hands, and they, in Russian it's called krutit gaiki,
Uh-huh.
meaning to like turn the bolt
turn the
or turn
screws.
the screw, meaning you have to be tough with the student. And so in the US, you're thinking, oh, I'm going to inspire this kid. We're going to have a good time and he'll want to
Right.
learn. And in Russia, it's like you have to make him learn.
Right.
And so this expectation from parents is definitely a different approach that most Westerners aren't used to. Like you have to make him sit down and really discipline him. And the discipline should come from the teacher in the parents.
Right. Exactly.
And when the student's acting out, you're thinking, okay, what do I do?
Right.
You can't threaten the student.
Right. But well, a Russian school teacher certainly would. So
I mean, yeah.
that's
Right.
kind of the end of cultural differences. There are lots of other little things that you'll come across, but the last con that we had on our list was climate. And I don't think we need to do a lot of discussion about this, but the climate has a big impact actually on teaching English, especially because you're going to be traveling to and from, where you live, to the school or to clients. And in the winter, if you're not used to that, it can be intense for some people. I grew up in Maine in the United States, and it was colder there than it ever was in Moscow for the most part. So it wasn't a big deal for me, but I know lots of people come from Florida or Southern California, and they're in for a rude awakening sometimes.
They really miss the sun. I had a couple of teachers from California. I mean, they bought a sun lamp, and I had never heard of that before then. But they bought a sun lamp, and I'm from Oregon, where it's just mild and rainy, so I didn't really mind the cold that much.
Yeah, I didn't either.
I just bundled up and kind of went my way. But trudging through snow when freshly fallen snow, when it snows in Moscow several days in a row, and they don't quite keep up with cleaning. If you're walking from the metro station to a student's house and it takes 10 to 15 minutes, that can be, and you're going there both ways. I one time calculated how much time I had spent walking, like 15 minutes from student 1 to their house and back. That's 30 minutes.
I think,
and then I had like 4 students.
Well, I think what makes it really hard, I remember, I'll never forget this. I was teaching in St. Petersburg on Vasilostrovsky Ostrov, and the school that sent me there was like, oh, it's only like 5 minutes from the metro. Well, maybe if there weren't any fences around the mosque, around the metro station and whatnot, right on the map, you're like, it looks close. But when you get there, there's obstacles all around, and you can't actually walk from point A to point B directly. You got to go all the way around,
Complexes.
That wasn't such a problem when the weather was nice, but I will tell you, in St. Petersburg, it rains all the time, or it's snowy and icy, and it was terrible, right? Because if you had to walk 15 minutes at 8 in the morning, and it looks like an ice rink, it's just not fun. Like, it definitely ruins your day. And then you got to you finish the lessons, and then you have to do it again.
You definitely learn how to walk on ice. Like, you do that walk
like
where you don't walk like a normal walk where your heel is you're picking up your heel. You walk kind of
you just
straight because you don't want to slip.
Like a penguin, you just kind of like slide your feet. But so those are kind of the pros and the cons of teaching English in Russia. We had a fantastic experience.
Yeah, let's recap. I just wanted to mention one more thing. So the pros of teaching in Russia are adventure, demand for teachers, and salary. And the one thing I wanted to mention about salary I forgot is there are few industries where if you're coming in at an entry level teaching English, like a language school, you make, 50,000 rubles. You sign a contract for 6-9 months, and after taking on private students, you can start making 300,000 rubles after just 6 months to a year. And I was surprised how much private students would actually pay. So when it comes to the pro about salary, I would say it ranges from 50,000 to 400, even 500,000, depending on what kind of clients you have. And then the 3 cons we mentioned were flexibility,
cultural difference
or lack thereof, cultural differences, and the climate.
Right. So let us know in the comments if you can think of other pros or cons teaching English in Russia. We'll see you in another video. This was Ask an Expat with Marcus and Matt from An Expat's Russia. We hope you enjoyed the video, and if you have a question about Russia, let us know in the comments. We'll answer it in another video.